Never before have we been faced with so many choices about how we should think, act, and live. How should we spend our time, our resources, and our money?
Blessed are the pure in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
How do we view ourselves and those around us?
Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
How can we find true success and lasting happiness?
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land.
How can we know what is right and true?
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
How can we make sense of suffering and loss?
Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
And those of us who want to continue with Jesus need to choose him and choose each other in a deeper way.
Welcome to the choices we face.
Welcome to another week of the Choices We Face. My name is Ralph Martin. Peter Herbeck is here as our co-host. And our special guest today is Dr. Janet Smith. Welcome, Dr. Janet. Dr. Smith is a professor at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in the Archdiocese of Detroit, where I also teach. And Dr. Smith is one of the leading experts in the Catholic Church on issues of human sexuality, church teaching in this area. And she's really been out there on the front lines for many years. She wrote one of the first books on Humanae Vitae, and she is teaching and writing articles, and she's just a very active, engaged Catholic laywoman. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you.
Tell us how this all started. How did you, a dedicated Catholic laywoman, become specialized in these areas?
Well, it's even more bizarre than you might think. I mean, my degree is actually in classical languages. So I won't give you the long story because it'll take more than the show, but a lot of it had to do with my involvement in the pro-life movement and trying to figure out why so many women were getting abortions. And then it seemed to me it was pretty obvious that they were having sexual relationships that couldn't accommodate a baby. I'm thinking, okay, why are they having sexual relationships that can't accommodate a baby? I moved backwards as a philosopher, and it seems that their contraception makes that possible. And so I got I became very interested in the Church's teaching on contraception. At the same time, a number of friends who were getting married and using natural family planning, and they seemed to me to be manifestly happier marriages and better relationships than those who were contracepting. They also lived by the Church's teaching before marriage. They had not had sex before marriage. And I just saw such a different ease with each other, greater intimacy, more commitment, rather than people who are having sex before marriage, contracepting, etc. And that sort of segued into all the bioethical issues as well. All these issues are just remarkably connected in respect to when human life begins, the value of human life, the value of sexuality, the dignity of the human person. All of these are remarkably connected.
Wow. How did you tackle such a controversial topic as one of your main missions?
Well, I've always had a taste for controversy from very young, and so I hope that God has been using this for good as opposed to ill. I was a little radical when I was in college, so I was used to running demonstrations and protesting. And at one time, when I started teaching at Notre Dame, I actually ran a protest against Hans Kung and once against Mario Cuomo. And it was just, I felt like I actually was a recycled radical.
Yeah.
It's just one controversial cause to another.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know that, when I was growing up, I know my parents and most of the Catholic parents I knew just took it as a matter of course that Catholics don't use contraception. They use natural family planning or whatever, and it just seemed to be accepted, in the church. And then something really changed after the Second Vatican Council. What do you think was going on? What do you think happened? It went from being sort of accepted as part of Catholic life to being tremendously controversial and
Well, I have to admit I've been remarkably ignorant about this for a long time. I always thought before Humanae Vitae that was sort of accepted very routinely in a kind of a blind way, that there wasn't any controversy and it was just what Catholics did. And I've been reading a new book called Catholics and Contraception, an American History, which unfortunately is very pro-contraception, but I actually think the evidence that this woman, Leslie Tentler, offers actually works against her case. And she demonstrates by going into archives of dioceses and looking at homilies that priests used to give, what was published in the diocesan newspaper, letters that bishops wrote, newspaper articles, radio shows, that between the 1920s and the 1960s, the Church's teaching on contraception was very aggressively taught within the Church and in the larger culture in a very interesting way. There were all these laws against contraception that were put, I think it was 1875, the Comstock laws, put on the book by Protestant legislators to what forbade use and dissemination of contraception.
And what was the motivation of those laws by the state?
The corruption was immense. I mean, I guess you would go to New York City and there would be prostitutes everywhere, pornography everywhere, and they associated, again, contraception with vice. It was something you would use with a prostitute or a mistress, but not with your spouse. All Christian churches were opposed to contraception. So it was something that was seen, and I think rightly seen, to foster vice. I think we're living in the same kind of culture right now. The entertainment world, et cetera, is just steeped. I mean, there's soft porn everywhere. TV commercials are soft porn. So you're dealing with a culture that's sexually out of control, and that as it was at that time. And so they put these laws on the books against contraception. And then in the 19-teens, Margaret Sanger came along and decided to really push for contraception, Planned Parenthood, et cetera. And the Catholic Church took on this battle and saw this as a threat to the church and family culture. So an amazing effort. There were, every Advent or Lent, there were retreats in a parish put on by Redemptorist priests. And they would always preach on a Wednesday night on contraception. There were priests once a year were expected to give at least a homily on contraception. It was brought up in the confessional. Spouses were asked about it. There was cardinals and bishops would engage Margaret Sanger in debates on the editorial pages of major newspapers. There were Catholic radio shows that covered this over and over again. Catholics apparently lived by it for the most part. Even in the 1950s, somewhere around 35% of Catholic women admitted to ever having used contraception. The rest of them said they had never used it. So something was going on, a real vibrancy, and Catholics were very proud to live by this. They felt that they were living radically the gospel, that it necessarily forced them to be less materialistic, right? Preferred life over money and things, felt their Catholic identity was worn very proudly. We stand over against the rest of the culture, which by that time was largely contraception. Contraception grew greatly among the rest of the culture during that time.
Yeah, well, then after 1968, when Pope Paul VI published his encyclical Humanae Vitae, sort of reaffirming this as the Church's teaching, it seems like all hell broke loose. You know,
yeah, and now I'm beginning to think it broke loose just a little bit before that, oddly enough. Again, it's new to me. But John Courtney Murray, a very great thinker, really, but he managed to convince Cardinal Cushing of New York that Catholics... Boston, thank you. Convinced him in Massachusetts, right, that the Church shouldn't be aggressively engaging the culture on this, that contraception was a private sin and we shouldn't make it a public crime. So the Church voluntarily withdrew. Or up to this point, again, it had been calling, the priests and bishops were calling up legislators and saying, listen, you're a Catholic, you can't vote to legalize contraception. And in 1965, there was a Supreme Court case, Griswold versus the state of Connecticut, that on the basis of the right to privacy permitted the sale of contraceptives, distribution of contraceptives. 8 years later, Roe versus Wade legalized abortion on the basis of the right to privacy. 20 years later, assisted suicide was legalized in Oregon on the basis of the right to privacy. Just 2 years ago, in Lawrence versus the state of Texas, homosexual relationships were legalized on the basis of the right to privacy. But the Church had already withdrawn from the culture on this in the early 60s. So it had lost its habit of engaging the culture, of insisting that Catholics live in accord with Catholic teaching. The dissent from Humanae Vitae again, took all the wind out of the Catholic sails. The dissent within the Church meant that we as a Church did not have any unity on this. So how could we engage the culture when we were so divided interiorly?
Yeah.
You see the issue surfacing now with fetal stem cell research, the same question. There's so much disinformation that's been in the news over the last year and a half or so about the whole area, and the Church is just beginning to engage the argument and more broadly with ads in the New York Times and other places, maybe going back to the very kind of thing you're mentioning right now.
I think most people have noticed a new aggressiveness on the part of the Church in the last year or so in engaging the culture and saying, listen, as Catholics, we have to bring our Catholic beliefs with us when we go to the voting booth. Right? We have to engage the culture. The bishops have taken out these beautiful ads explaining why stem cell research is wrong. And I think they're also going to be enormously helpful in fighting abortion, because it's this affirmation of the life from the moment of conception, that the embryo is a human being. It's one of the things that's conceptually hard for people to get, that we could have started so small. But you want to say, oak trees start so small. You know, most everything has a very small beginning. And just because you're very small doesn't mean you don't have immense value. You know, if we found an egg of a bald eagle, you would treat it just as absolutely fantastically valuable, because it's an endangered species. Well, human beings are not endangered species, but we have immortal souls. So every human being is of infinite value. So we treat this, so because it's so small, we think it doesn't have any value. And the church is really getting aggressive on it. The embryonic stem cell question has given us another opportunity to get in the fray and try to teach both Catholics and the public about this matter.
What would you say, I mean, I think there's many people who to this day have never heard a clear explanation of why the Catholic Church teaches in this area of contraception. What's the reasons for the teaching of not having artificial birth control?
Well, Ralph, I generally require 2 hours time to make most of the most basic point. But there's many ways of dealing with it. But basically, that the sexual act is meant to be strictly between spouses, right? Not outside of marriage, but within marriage. And it's supposed to understand that the ability to bring forth a new human life, to cooperate with God in bringing forth a new human soul, again, has infinite value. And that our culture is so far from this, because it doesn't even understand the sexual act as something that's meant to be only between spouses, an act of complete self-giving, right? Exclusive between the two of them, something I don't do with anybody else. I would never do with any else. My sexuality belongs to my spouse. And then to see children as this great gift. I mean, this is the job of spouses, really, is to bring new human beings into existence. This is what God wants.
Yeah, it's pretty special, isn't it?
Incredibly special.
Yeah.
And so yes, marriage is meant for intimacy. Marriage is meant for bonding. But the most manifest means of bonding is a new human being. You have two become one in a fleshly way and also eternally. This new human being would not have come into existence except for these two people made this kind of commitment to each other. And so to put a barrier between that and to say that this is somehow a threat to our relationship, that we might have children, to be negative about bringing forth a new human being, just diminishes the importance of the whole relationship and makes it much more a physical pleasure than really a way of participating in God's creative act.
Yeah. What about the argument that I've heard Catholic theologians and Catholic couples use, saying that, you know, our marriage in general is open to life, and we've had 4 children or whatever, and every act of intercourse doesn't have to be open to life if our marriage in general is open. What do you make of that?
The church doesn't, no one, or God and the church doesn't judge acts by an aggregate, all right? Most of the things I say are truthful, all right? Or most of my acts are non-racist, or most of my acts with my spouse, most of my sexual acts are with my spouse, I'm mostly faithful. No, each and every act has to speak the fullness of truth, right? And that there's a way that it's diminishing each sexual act is its own huge thing. It's a huge thing. It's a huge commitment between these two individuals, and it's something that, it's a language that they speak. And to take out the fertility is to diminish the truth of that statement. A simple thing is, again, it's perfectly possible, and our culture is doing it all the time. It makes some sense that you can have contraceptive sex with just about anybody. Non-contraceptive sex you should only have with your spouse. And that's the infinite difference between the two acts. A contraceptive sex reduces your spouse, actually, to just anybody else. A non-contraceptive act means I'm committed to you forever. And that's what the act should always say. Contraception diminishes the meaning of that act. So to look that each act has its own huge meaning, and that contraception diminishes that meaning. You don't look at the whole marriage, you look at each act.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, what about the argument, which I've also heard, that practicing natural family planning, which the church permits for serious reasons, if there's a reason for spacing children or not having children right now, it's permissible to engage in marital intercourse with the intention of not conceiving a baby. Now, what's the difference between that and artificial contraception? It seems like the intention is the same.
Right.
We don't feel like we should have a baby right now, and it's just a matter of, you know, artificial or natural means.
Well, these are excellent. These are exactly the questions that people bring up. And
I imagine you've heard these before.
Yeah, I've heard them before. But the logic of them, I'm going to get to logic in a minute, but first I just want to speak about the lived reality. You know, when people say that to me, there's no difference between natural family planning and contraception. I say to them, well, then why don't you use natural family planning instead of contraception? And then they say that would be completely different, right? And they want to say, well, both people are trying to have sex and not have babies, but they realize the lived difference would be immensely different. With contraception, they feel completely in control. They can have sex whenever they want to have sex, and they feel much more confident that it's going to work. Even though natural family planning is equally or even more effective, they have that sense, I'm in control, all right? Whereas natural family planning couples, they do feel like they have to trust God more. Even though it's every bit as effective, but they still have that sense of the openness of the act.
Yeah, and there's still a possibility. There's still an openness there that if the Lord wanted to change things around, you can still have a baby, right?
But there's also the sense of, again, self-denial. It's the sense that if I can't accept a child right now, I am going to have to deny myself and my spouse. We're going to deny ourselves sexual intercourse during this fertile time. So you're still very respectful of fertility, that the fertile time is considered almost like a sacred ground. And you say, when we engage during sex during this time, we are inviting God to create a new human life, right? Now, God says we can have sex all month long. That's a good thing. It's a way of spouses, again, expressing their self-giving to each other and receiving of the other. But you say during the fertile time, God could be present in a more sort of dramatic way by creating a new human soul. And you say, well, if we're not ready for one right now, we're not going to engage in sex during that time. Whereas a contracepting couple says, we want sex all month long, we want it on our terms. Yeah. So there's that huge difference.
Yeah,
Not to
it's like respecting the way God created us with these fertile times, and yeah, and
we're respecting that time. Really, you're always saying fertility is a good, whereas contraception is saying sometimes fertility is bad, all right, and we're going to work against it. Whereas with natural family planning, you're saying it's a good and we're not going to approach it at this time. So it's not such a great analogy, but if you're dieting, you're denying yourself all sorts of good things. You're not saying they're bad, but when you're, say, engaging in bulimia or something, you're eating and then throwing up. And I think contraception is a little bit like that. You're saying we want to engage in an act during the fertile time, but we want to undo that fertility. Whereas the NFP couple is saying during the fertile time, we're saying we can't enjoy this sort of rich sex at this point, right? And the live difference, again, is immense. Couples who use contraception divorce at the rate of about 50%. Couples using natural family planning almost never divorce. There's a great book of testimonies put out by One More Soul called Sterilization Reversals. And this is about, I forget, it's about 18 couples or so who have been sterilized. And they were all hoping that they would bring some new bliss into their relationship. Right? Most of these couples had troubled relationships. And they thought, okay, if we could just have sex spontaneously without being concerned about another pregnancy, clearly the marriage would greatly improve. So, and many of these on the advice of a priest, with the approval of a priest, got sterilized, right? And they felt their marriage go downhill fast, right? It was troubled before, and now it was empty, right? And through all sorts of reasons, they were convicted about this and came to see the wrongness of sterilization, got a reversal, and found grace just pour into their life. And part of it was, again, they thought that sterilization would fix a problem. It's not going to fix any problems, right? You got to work on the problem, right? And when they did that, and they got the sterilization reversed, and they started living by God's laws, they found their marriage was enhanced greatly.
Yeah, that's great. You know, one of the things that strikes me is that, thinking about my parents and the situation today, is that with my parents, there was like a lived atmosphere of faith. I mean, there was a trust in the teaching of the church. There was a fear of God. There was a love of God. There was a there's sort of like this was an aspect of life that happened in a larger context of faith, and what we have now is people hear about this teaching and they don't have the larger context of faith, they don't have the biblical worldview, they don't have the trust or confidence or faith in the teaching authority of the church, and so it's so much harder. Like it's really part of a whole picture of God's will for human beings and God's grace and God's saving action and the sacramentality of marriage and all that. And when that's not there, it's hard to take this as an isolated teaching and see that it's possible or understand it in a certain kind of way.
Yeah, there's the whole, as you're describing the sacredness of the act, people who are practicing natural family planning are coming to it and saying there's something here that I have to acknowledge and respect, and live with integrity vis-a-vis this given wonder that God has given to us. I can't just impose on it what I want it to be and not be, when I want it to be this and not be that, you know what I mean? And I think in our culture today, that vision, which you're talking about, the kind our parents had, that part of that worldview was one of the things you came to, so there's something larger than just my desires here that I have to respect, and I can't make it go away because my passions are so strong or I want it to be. Whereas today, in this culture, it's what I want it to be. I name its value. I tell you, I can determine what I want it to be and not want it to be for me, because everybody chooses for themselves what is their truth and their own value and the rest of it. And that whole worldview collision and that whole modern way of looking at truth and beauty and the rest of it is really affecting the way people are able to even grasp the significance of the act, beyond their own self-interest,
Yeah, and I think too that when people hear the teaching, they say that's a hard saying, and we know that Jesus experienced, Jesus sometimes said things and people say, gee, that's tough, how can you do that, gee, one man and one woman together for life, who can do that? Better not to get married. And then Jesus, of course, with God all things are possible. And so even though this is a tough teaching because of our fallen natures, and people aren't used to kind of denying themselves. I mean, our whole culture say, don't deny yourself, you have everything you want whenever you want it, that type of thing. And so the whole idea of the spiritual life that has to accompany this way of life has to be brought back. People have to be put in contact with the spiritual resources, the sacraments, the Eucharist, the sacrament of reconciliation, the life of prayer, the life of meditation on God's Word that kind of brings about a strength that helps us to overcome our disordered desires,
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, it has to be a package deal. But what I find is that the friends I have who are using natural family planning, watching them grow in their marriage and watching them grow in their love and respect for each other. I always want to say at a certain point they are what I call very married. Right? No matter what problems they have, every marriage, I suppose I can tell, every marriage goes through some really difficult periods. But they've got this commitment. We're going to work this out no matter what, right? Whereas I feel couples who contracept, they've got, again, many of them have been through several quasi-divorces. I mean, they have sex before marriage, break up a couple times. The contraceptive sex, again, is not that engaging, so you're always keeping that distance from each other. So you're in marriage, you've already broken up a couple times before marriage in probably sexual relationships, and now it's just, okay, one more, we took a vow, but we hope that would keep us together, but it didn't. And just the whole atmosphere, you say, is completely different.
It's really true. It's really true. There's such one of the things I can almost feel a physical pain about is just the continual demeaning of the meaning of human life and human sexuality and relationships between man and woman. I mean, you see the casualness with which people have relationships. It's like they don't value themselves. They don't value this gift that a man and woman can give themselves to each other in a holy undertaking, to be faithful to each other for life and bring forth new life. And it's sad to see our generation being deprived of the beauty of the gift of creation, the gift of married sexuality, and to trivialize it, into recreational sex or something that's part of a date.
And you see how contraception and abortion are the fail-safes. So I can have this. I can have all this supposed pleasure that you see on TV coming at you, Entertainment Tonight and all these. I can live like these people live, and I don't have to miss out on anything. And what's going to ensure that I can keep doing it is contraception. If that fails, then I always have abortion right here. And that you see how the culture of death, there's an exchange of worldviews. You move from a gospel worldview, a kingdom worldview that says, you know what, no, it's worth sacrificing. It's worth making personal sacrifice, and that's going to be fulfilling for me in the end. I'm going to be a stronger, healthier person, and my love for my spouse will deepen, as opposed to the worldview that says, no, you need to get what you can get now. because time is short, go get it, and these things will ensure that it's not going to inconvenience you in any way. So I can remove responsibility from sexuality, I can remove sex from procreation, and make it just that thing, something just to satisfy myself.
Chad, you know, one of the things I find exciting is just how you and others now are really getting this word out. I know from our contact that you travel a lot, and you just came back from South Carolina, North Carolina, talking to priests there, and you go to parishes, you go to dioceses, you go to universities. So I just like to encourage any of our viewers that if you'd like to have Janet come and talk to your parish or
I thought he was my friend.
your seminary or your priest, you know, we'll put up the contact information on the screen so people know how to contact you. And because you're doing a tremendous job just getting this beautiful vision, this good news.
Yeah.
You know, it's really good news about human life and human sexuality. And thank you so much for your faithfulness all these years and your active work in bringing this message.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, but I just wanted to thank you.
Well, the last thing I might say is, again, is how much respect there is between couples who use natural family planning. Women whose husbands will use it regard their husbands so highly.
Yeah.
And they feel highly regarded.
That's good.
You can see it between the two of them.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, Peter, thank you too, as a married man and father and husband, and it's great to be able to just look at the beauty of these teachings and what the good news is that's behind it. Well, I've written a booklet. It's called What Happens When I Die, and we'd like to make it available to you at no cost, just for the asking. Call the 800 number or write to the address or access our website and we'll get it right off to you. Until next week, this is Ralph Martin and Peter Herbeck and Dr. Janet Smith wishing you the very best. A life open to the really good news that God loves us and has created us, has a purpose and plan for our life, and it involves a wonderful truth and a wonderful, beautiful reality about married love and sexuality, according to the teaching of the Church. Life is short, and the years fly by with increasing speed. Life is fragile, and the fate of all human flesh is death. At some point, we all ask, what happens when I die? Is there life after death? What will it be like? How does what I do in this life affect what happens when I die? My booklet provides some answers to these important questions by reflecting on what Scripture and the Church say about what happens when I die. To receive this free booklet, call Renewal Ministries at 1-800-282-4789 or visit us on the web at renewalministries.net.
Happy birthday to you.
The decision to have an abortion not only affects that moment in your life,
Kristen Gordon.
it affects many precious moments to come.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
Please remember, where there's life, there's hope. A message from Priests for Life.